So welcome to this lab video. So these videos are going to be more informal, where I'm going to be sitting chatting with my students, discussing various problems and so on. Although in the first couple of videos I'll be giving more of an introduction, but you will get a feel for how one codes, how one makes mistakes while coding, how do we correct those mistakes, how do we profile, how do we debug and so on. So in this video we will focus on some of the basics of MATLAB. So we will do a quick MATLAB overview. So we will just go over some basic things. Okay, I think you are familiar with many of these concepts, but let us just skim through all of these again. So there are a bunch of basic MATLAB commands that you need to know, beginning with, of course, with how do you clear the screen using CLC. Then clear removes all the variables. You would have seen that the workspace becomes empty once you type clear. So clear all removes all variables, functions and everything from the memory, anything that you have defined. LS lists whatever is in the current directory. You can also use various shell commands. The one useful thing I often use is, if you are on Windows especially, is to use exclamation explorer dot. It will open a Windows folder in the current directory, right. It will show the directory, you can copy files there, you can add files there and so on. And PWD shows the current working directory, right. These are all almost basic commands. Then help gives you help for a given command, and you may often want to use doc, because for example even if you click something in you can say doc ls and it will show you, it will open the MATLAB help browser with the details of the command. It will give you examples, it is hyperlinked, it is nicely formatted, and you can understand a lot more by looking at the documentation. So that is using doc ls. And if you want to search for a particular thing, suppose you want to figure out how to create a sparse matrix, just say look for sparse and it will return a bunch of functions which have sparse mentioned somewhere in the name. So you will see that there are a bunch of, so in this case I get mostly a lot of examples from different toolboxes actually, right, including the Cobra toolbox and so on. Right. So I am just can clear it. Let us say we want to create a matrix of zeros. So, you can say A is zeros of 10, and then if you say who, it will say your variables are whatever, and if you say who s, right, whos, it will give you more details. It will tell you what is the size of the matrix and how much space is being taken up and so on. So, let us say A equals zeros of 100. So, this will create a 100 by 100 matrix of zeros. So, you see it is taking up around how much space? 10,000 elements, 8 bytes per element, 80,000, right. So, now if I say A1 equals sparse of A, A1 takes just 824 bytes, right. So, that also sounds like a lot, but it basically stores the entire same matrix in about 1/100th of the space, right. We will look at sparse in a moment. So, let us look at some of the other basic commands. You can also say whos minus file name minus file name dot mat. So, let us say you just save it, it will save everything to matlab dot mat. So, if you now say whos minus file matlab dot mat, it will tell you what are all the variables present in that file. These are basic useful functions that one needs to know. Without these, your everyday MATLAB cannot run. No, no type.
It's
Class. Right. So it just says double and says so it is actually a 1 cross 2 matrix. That's what is returned. Right. And length, what does this return? Length of SZ return the longest dimension, which is 2. So make sure you understand what it returns. It is equivalent to max size x for non-empty arrays and 0 for empty ones. Right. You also have, which tells you the number of elements, which in this case it will be 10,000, because we created a 100 cross 100 matrix a little while ago. Standard, transpose the matrix. So let's create a random matrix. Right. So you can now say I'll just do a small trick here. SPY shows you the sparsity pattern. I'll just get to that in a moment, but let's just okay, you can see that this matrix, or we should probably have a slightly bigger matrix, so then you can see a picture. This is how this matrix looks, and if you now, you will be able to see that this is actually symmetric. Or there is a small trick I will use. You will actually see that now this looks really symmetric. This is actually a matrix reordering thing, which is very useful for several kinds of algorithms, but essentially you will be able to see that this is now a symmetric matrix. What does this? This is just a, this just tells you what are the non-zero elements in the matrix. That's all. So that is something known as image SC. We are getting a little ahead of ourselves, but right, and you can also say you can have different kinds of there are different built-in color maps. The usual one is jet, or I think that's been changed in the more recent MATLAB versions. Something called Parula. This is the default color map. Okay, So essentially I did all this to show you how you can transpose a matrix and get a symmetric matrix, right. So A dash gives you the transpose. So more other commonly useful things include, so every 7th number, and if you want something else, so if you want 15 equally spaced numbers between 1 and the same thing, right. This is different though. So you, if you put 100 you will get equally spaced numbers. You can also have log space. Oops. This gives you points that are log spaced. So if you actually do log of this can actually be useful, especially when you are doing parameter estimation and so on. You may want to do a log sampling of the parameter space, because whenever you need to sample across orders of magnitude, you would need to resort to log sampling. So in this first MATLAB lab video, we looked at some of the basics of MATLAB, but in the next video we will go on to some very interesting and in my opinion one of the most important advantages of using MATLAB for computation, which is the various ways one can index data in MATLAB.